episode of Food Systems Fridays. And this Food Systems Fridays is organized by the Sustainable Food Systems faculty at Prescott College. My name is Robin Curry, and I'm the director of the Master of Science in Sustainable Food Systems program, which is an online program, always has been, that seeks to support students in their efforts to build more sustainable food systems in their own communities. College towns seem to collect a disproportionate number of academic activists, which is fabulous, but our hometowns need our students as they're applying what they're learning in the classroom to improve their food systems. Also, the invitation, as every week, teachers with so many of you looking for content, and parents with so many of you also homeschooling now, and also at the university level, as we're looking for content for our food systems classes, please feel free to integrate and incorporate this series into your online classrooms. There are families all over the country encountering situations where they're finding that they cannot find the kinds of foods they're used to and the amounts that they're used to for a lot of different reasons, whether that is just access issues in general because it's not there because of issues with supply chain, or whether it's because of unemployment, newly found unemployment, which actually in our world is disproportionately hitting the restaurant sector, which is very concerning for us. The spotlight is on food supply chains, and clearly many of our existing food systems are not equitably ensuring food for all, even in the best of times. So for those of you who are less familiar, a food system encompasses all of the stages of keeping us nourished. So that's growing, harvesting, packing, processing, transforming, marketing, consuming, and disposing of food. At Prescott College, we're avid advocates for sustainable diets, and sustainable diets are those diets that are low in environmental impacts, most often with local supply chains and a little more plant-based, but they can play an important role in ensuring food and nutrition security. As a faculty, we are thinking about the increased vulnerability to food insecurity that has happened as a result of isolation measures associated with the COVID-19 virus. This shows us more now than ever that we have important work to do to ensure safe, resilient food systems. So how do we get this right? The Food Systems Friday series for the near future will focus on policies, practices, and people who can show us and help us learn about models of sustainable food systems for communities. Before we introduce today's panel, I just want to let you know that for next week, we'll be airing at exactly the same time, and we're checking in with our colleagues in Alaska concerning COVID-19 impacts and pivots that have happened in the Alaskan food systems. So Robbie Mixon, she's the director of the Alaska Food Policy Council. Kyra Wagner, she's the director of Sustainable Homer and the Homer Soil and Water Conservation District. And Rachel Miller, who's faculty at Alaska Pacific University and co-director of Food Research Enterprise and Sustainability Hub. If you registered for this webinar, you'll get an automatic invitation to the next one along with the video of today's. Now, welcome to Zoom. We're now experts as our whole lives are spent on these little teeny tiny boxes. But for some of you, this may be the first time that you've participated on an online webinar platform like this. So this particular format is a little bit different than a regular Zoom call. So the first thing that's different is that this is being recorded. So we make the webinar available for free via our website for folks who are unable to attend. So please understand that your participation in the chat and any of the questions or questions that you may pose is your agreement to allow us to capture what you've expressed or the resources that you've shared and to then distribute that as part of the webinar series. Another technical note, you may notice that like your little face didn't pop up. So in a webinar format, your audio will be muted and your video will be off, but you're listed as a participant. And so please, you're encouraged to please go ahead and introduce yourself through the chat because this is where all the good stuff happens. So for the chat function, if you take your cursor and place it at the bottom of the page, it'll bring up the toolbar. You'll see a little talk bubble. So this is a toggle that'll bring up the chat space. I'd recommend leaving it up so that you can interact with one another, ask questions, or share resources as our speakers are presenting. We will also be sharing more information about speakers and additional resources for you during the talk also. So you'll see in that chat function a little blue rectangle that tells you who you'll be communicating with if you send a message. So there's an option that says everyone and the panelists. And so that ensures that we will see your questions so that we can pose it to the panelists. It's a great community building space. And so I would encourage you to please go ahead and introduce yourself, provide a brief introduction, and maybe say why you registered for the webinar today. Please feel free to share your contacts with either openly or individually, privately. You'll see also down at that bottom menu that there's a Q&A function. And so you can also pose your questions for the panelists in that Q&A area or within the chat. So I'll be monitoring those spaces. And in case you encounter technical problems, have comments or questions, I'm the face behind the typing there. So please do take a quick minute to say hello, tell us where you're located, and share anything relevant to our topic today. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our discussion facilitator today. So Dr. Lisa Trocchia is here with us today, and she's an associate faculty member at Prescott College, teaching in the graduate program in sustainable food systems. She's an interdisciplinary food systems scholar, and her interests are in the spaces where food and social change intersect. Lisa is also the host of The Capstone, a new podcast produced by Prescott College celebrating fresh perspectives from graduate students on how to create more just and sustainable food systems. Lisa, over to you.
Okay, thank you very much. And since we're kind of going back and forth in terms of our roles here today, it's probably a good time to actually formally introduce you as well, Robin. Yeah, so you mentioned you're the Director of Sustainable Food Systems Program at Prescott College. And you are also an ethnoecologist specializing in agrobiodiversity conservation in small-scale agricultural systems. So Robin is really basically a Wonder Woman. I could go on and on and on, but please check the links that you'll see in the chat for all of our panelists and for Robin. And you can look into those accomplishments a little bit more. So as she said, Robin will be facilitating the chat space and curating the questions that you have for the panelists, and she'll lead the Q&A session following the panel discussion. So why are we here? Let's get started. We are going to focus today on the voice of chefs as educators. Chefs explore food through the senses, and because of how they understand food, we as eaters are drawn into experiences with food that lead to our own, often new, insights and appreciation of the and certainly ways of knowing. So it's in this context that it's easy to see how being a chef and being an educator mesh so beautifully. Chefs who are educators are at the leading edge of addressing issues of national health and well-being, labor, shaping opportunities for sustainability, just to name a few. I think you'll see, if you come away with anything from these webinars, hopefully it is understanding that food is part of a complex system. So for example, teaching people of all ages, adults and children, the skills necessary to select, handle, and prepare nutritious food, as well as how to dispose of food waste, creates better health outcomes. By increasing consumption of fruits and vegetables, it creates an appreciation for the economics of food. By teaching folks where to source food and how to be thrifty and efficient. Food literacy and cooking education can impact food insecurity by increasing self-sufficiency and can lead eventually to consumer-initiated policy shifts. Encouraging various methods for the composting of food waste has a direct and positive effect on the health of the planet. So all of these skills can actually also lead to employment and or entrepreneurial opportunities. So there are many things we hope to talk with our distinguished panel of chefs about today, especially the importance of education and what a chef's role can be in the long term in terms of food system sustainability. As well, we want to acknowledge that commercial, school, and educational kitchens have been hit hard by the COVID-19 restrictions. So I'm looking forward to hearing from our panelists about these challenges and what opportunities also might be emerging. So I will get to introducing these folks, and I'm going to do it in reverse alpha order, just because I was the kid with the name that always was at the end of the roll call. So I'm going to switch it up today. So I'll run through these introductions very briefly because we want to move on to being able to talk some, but to do, again, please check in the chat for their extended bios. So I'll start with Isaiah Ruffin. He's a graduate of Johnson & Wales University Culinary Arts and Food Service Management program in Denver, Colorado. And he holds a master's in sustainable food systems from Green Mountain College in Vermont. He is currently the executive chef of the Alexandria City Public School District in Alexandria City, Virginia. In this position, he manages the menu for a school district that has, wait for it, 18,000 K through 12 students. He also manages the farm to school initiatives and manages the cafeteria staff training and development. Our second guest is Ben Rengstorf, and he has a culinary arts degree, and is also a public school teacher in Minneapolis, Minnesota. In 2019, he designed and founded the Culinary Arts program at Roosevelt High School, where he currently teaches and serves as co-chair of the Food Systems Department, which is just amazing to me to think that a high school actually has a food systems department. So wonderful. Adding to degrees in English and Spanish and education and culinary arts, Ben is currently enrolled in the Sustainable Food Systems program here at Prescott College. And last but not least, we have Gabe Gardner. Gabe is the director of food programs at the Local First Arizona Foundation and formerly a chef instructor. He has been working in the hospitality industry since the tender age of 13. He is a graduate of the Pennsylvania Institute of Culinary Arts in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and Sullivan University in Louisville, Kentucky. Additionally, Gabe holds a Master of Science degree in Sustainable Food Systems from Green Mountain College. So welcome to you all. It's so great to see you.
Thank you.
Hey, good to see you. So let's jump into some questions. I thought first, it might be prudent just to ask you to define culinary education. How is it similar or different from what we think of when we say food systems education or culinary nutrition or even home economics? What are the subtleties here?
I can start with that question. As a teacher, I teach high school grades 9 through 12 at Roosevelt High School, which is a public school in Minneapolis, Minnesota. And so thinking about, I've gone back and forth between using the terms food education and culinary education. I think culinary really gets at the entry point of cooking and preparing food. And then beyond that, it can go anywhere. But I think for the culinary arts classes that we teach at Roosevelt, they are based usually first in cooking, and then we're always looking at connections between different elements of the food system and ways to connect with different aspects of the public education system and also the community. But we're usually cooking something to go along with it. It's very central. And then as far as like what home economics was when I was littler, or when I was in school, has turned into family and consumer sciences. And that is, it's more broad, but it does usually encompass culinary arts classes. So most culinary arts teachers in the public schools, K-12, are FACS teachers. But I'd be interested in what Isaiah and Gabe, because you have different roles, so how you see it.
Well, I see culinary education very similar to the way you described it. For me, culinary education starts and ends with the staff who prepare the meals at all of our schools. And before my arrival, all of it was heat and serve. And now that we're looking to do different things, culinary education for these adults are vital to their professional careers. And the difference between the like culinary education and culinary nutrition and home economics really doesn't apply so much to our wonderful school nutrition associates.
I would say that culinary education is about skill and craft and dedication. When I was teaching, I taught at culinary schools in a college level, and what I would always tell students is that a culinary degree shows that you have dedication to the industry, but the real education begins once you graduate and you're working in a hotel or a restaurant or a country club and so on. So I think food systems education is about the broader implications of the choices we make, whether it be in the food industry or homes or buying habits, policy decisions, ecological choices. Like, I think it encompasses all of that. And to Ben's point, I think to bring those ideas into a structured culinary classroom where you might be making eggplant parmesan and talk about, okay, well, where did this eggplant come from and why? And, you know, how did this dish come together based around the history of it, or the, I don't know, the social matters that put that dish together, I think are important.
Yeah, those are great responses from each of you, and I think it previews the different perspectives that you're all going to be able to bring to what we talk about today. So I would like to give you a chance to actually talk about what you're doing. I'm sure folks are curious about your interests and your motivations, but let us know what you're working on right now in your dual roles as chefs and educators. Well, I'll just call on someone. Hi, Isaiah, you happen to be right there on the left top on my screen, so why don't you go first?
All right, so I'm the executive chef of a school district in Northern Virginia. My role is menu development, farm to school initiatives, training and development, and how do you say this? Stakeholder engagement when it comes to the school nutrition program at our wonderful 18 schools. 18 schools, 18,000 students. It's weird how that works out. We actually only have one high school, and it's T.C. Williams. It was, I don't know if you saw the movie with Denzel Washington, like Remember the Titans, same location. It has roughly almost 5,000 students, high school, and that's the only high school we have in our district. My role when it comes to like being a chef, it's a new position that was just created last year. I actually came on right after the position was created. And some of the big things I've been working on is like my whole goal, first thing was to get rid of styrofoam, like clean up, like green up our operations. And we did it a week or two before we closed the schools, which was outstanding. But also I want to start getting us cooking from scratch. 99% of what we were doing was heat and serve. It came in a box and a plastic bag, and that mode of operation has lowered our social capital with our stakeholders. So that brings to another point where I go to every PTA, whenever there's an opportunity to cater an event, to get in front of problems or to address our students. We have 20% of our students are Muslim. And our students come from over 125 countries. So I'm trying to have our menu reflective of all those students so they can help bridge that gap. Because I don't see like lunchtime or the cafeteria as a break from education, but an extension to it.
Wow, that's amazing. Ben, how about you?
Well, I sort of hesitate to call myself a chef. I was in education for over a decade as a public school teacher before I started the journey into food education. And so I spent a long time looking at the landscape of what was happening, especially in the K-12 system. And in Minneapolis, it had completely disappeared, even as a FACS or home ec program. And so then I went back to culinary school and got a degree, really with the lens of like, how do we teach this and integrate this into into the public school system, so that it's not a piecemeal, it's not something coming in, but it's there as one of the foundational pieces. And so this past year I started teaching full-time with culinary arts, pivoting from language, Spanish and English. And so what we're looking at doing, we have an urban farming program at Roosevelt. And so together we've put it together into a food systems department. And we're also working with the culinary and all of the food workers in all of the meal programs in ways that we can work together, as well as with the community. So there are community gardens nearby, and that we're now starting to put on campus that are partnerships. So really looking at it's that large matrix of how students can learn about food, how they can learn to cook for themselves, or if they want to go into the industry in any way, how they can learn about sustainability and really harness job readiness skills, learn about the world. I guess it's cooking as the entry point, and then it really broadens out.
Right, exactly. And we'll hopefully elaborate on that a little bit. But Gabe, let us hear from you in terms of what you're up to.
Sure. My current project, I do a bunch of different things, but I currently manage and run an incubator for micro food entrepreneurs, which focuses on the intersection between food and community and economic development for everyone, realizing that there is such a wealth gap. The incubator is housed in an income-dependent housing development, and for all you MSFS students out there, I started this by doing my capstone, and I just kind of never left, and I convinced the people to give me a job. Anyway, so what I really like is that it helps to give a voice to cuisines and chefs that have not been traditionally highlighted or encouraged. I came to the role as a chef and educator, this role that I'm in now, as somebody who'd never had a job where I didn't wear a chef coat. And I didn't really know how to do that. I'm very comfortable in a kitchen. The other piece of it was there was a huge learning curve. But I quickly found that by helping to level the playing field and highlight those voices, in addition to being incredibly rewarding, I have learned multitudes about the food system and the way it works and the way other cultures approach food. So
yeah, it's wonderful. Go ahead. I didn't mean to jump in. Were you?
No, that was it. Yeah, that's it.
It's just such a wide range of experience that you're bringing to the table here, pardon the pun, but it's just wonderful. So I want to kind of build on that and what you were talking about, Ben, in terms of what you really are hoping, what the advantages you hope to provide in your work are. So I don't know. There are all kinds of positive outcomes of this type of education. And I talked about some of the connections in the introduction about, and y'all are a great systems thinking people at this point, having gone through the Masters in Sustainable Food Systems program, but everything's connected. So how does the work that you do connect to other things? And what are the advantages that you hope that the people participating will get out of that?
I can start with this one. So part of the work, I mentioned that the incubator that I help run is in the income-dependent housing development. And so as part of that deal, we give back to the residents of the community. There's about 500 residents that live in these 3 apartment buildings. And so part of giving that back to the community is I do a kids cooking class, which when I came to my role, it was never anything that I intended to do. I just went over and kind of introduced myself to the property managers, and before I knew it, I was signed up to have these kids come once a week into my kitchen, and like, surprise. So but the positive outcomes of that have been, and the thing that I try to focus on when I'm working with these kids that are somewhere between the age of 5 years old and 11 or 12. By the time they're 12, they think it's not cool anymore to come to cooking class. But I try to expand their palate. The rule in my classroom is you don't have to like everything, but you have to taste everything. And I always tell them a story. When I got to culinary school, I was 18 years old, and I'd never had a mushroom that didn't come out of a can. Just because I grew up in the Midwest, and it's just not what we did. So that was one of the first experiences where I was expanding my palate. And so my goal is that if I can get them to kind of eat some things that they're not familiar with, they may like it, they may hate it, but the goal is to get them to try it. And when they have experienced and expect a wider variety of food, my hope is that as they become adults with an expanded palate, that they will require the food system to respond, meaning that farmers will fill the need with more biodiverse farming methods and better options, healthier choices, and in a more socially and economically and ecologically aware way.
Yeah, tremendous. And I know, Isaiah, you mentioned at the top that really what you're doing is as much for the students as it is for the food workers.
Yes, definitely. There's a big misconception when it comes to, well, it's actually not that big of a misconception, like the traditional lunch lady. I've had some staff who've been in the school district for over 30 years and they've actually never cooked a thing. And it's scary to think, and they're all like, I cook at home, I love to cook, but this commercial kitchen, I have no idea what to do. And a lot of that leads to direction of where I'm trying to go and how I work with them.
Yeah, that's great. Ben, thoughts?
Yeah, so many thoughts about positive outcomes for students and the community. I guess the one word that you've used a lot that keeps coming back into my head is the connection. That it's a way that I've seen students connect with their food, they connect with each other, with themselves, and it's really, all these stories are different, and it's so cool to see how students can kind of enter wherever they're ready or they're able, and then really go anywhere with that. So you kind of have this infinite entry point, ability, and then you have sort of infinite outcomes, positive outcomes with it. And I was thinking just about the way when the students come into class, they come in with all of sort of that insecurity, and there's bravado, and you have, Isaiah, like you were saying, lots of different languages, lots of different backgrounds. And then throughout the weeks in the semester of us cooking together, and then they get to be in groups with each other and kind of decide what they're going to cook and talk about, the foods that they like. The culture really, they become much more connected, and the culture shifts. So that also, I guess, can serve, between private businesses or the cafeteria workers. We're trying to work with everybody to bring everybody together around food, which it's a surprisingly, the system is not set up for that. So that's it's a good challenge to have, and bringing in the community. And so
that's a good point. You say how we're not set up to talk. School nutrition or school food nutrition services in the US are self-funded. So that means if kids don't eat lunch, you don't have a school nutrition program. There's some other districts that I follow and I work with that they've approached this everybody's support local, support local. A lot of these school districts are marketing that way. If you want our kids to have better foods, or if you want better, you got to invest, you need to buy lunch. Actually, in Minneapolis, I forgot the chef's name who in the school district. He said when he first came on, they had a low participation and everybody wanted better food. He said, in order to do that, I need. He got with all the parents, said, I need you to buy lunch once a week, and that will give me the funds to bring the change that you're hoping for. And that's an approach I've actually taken with a few of our schools. So like, we want organic milk, and I'm like, okay, well, I need you to buy lunch 4 days a week in order for us to afford that organic milk. And you'd be surprised how often people are like, oh, that's it? Like, I just got to spend $12 and my kids will have organic milk 5 days a week. I'm like, exactly. It works out.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm thinking about the dynamics here, which are very different from an urban area where in some districts there are up to 80% of students getting free and reduced lunches.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and so that's kind of a different dynamic. I don't know if you're not in that situation, but
Well, Alexandria City, we're about 60% free and reduced lunch, and our participation goes between 60 and 70%, which is pretty average for our model. It has gone up about 5% in the last 4 months or like 2 months before we went on this COVID break. And I anticipate it getting higher as we increase our stakeholder involvement in the program.
yeah, absolutely. And that transitions into something I really wanted to talk about because we're hearing a lot about food systems now in the midst of this COVID crisis. Things are becoming visible for people. Understanding, as you said, Ben, those connections are starting to become visible. So I'm wondering if each one of you might not take a stab at answering kind of or explaining, letting people know what's going on in your bioregion, what's going on where you live relative to all of this and your work, and just, you know, how's it impacting what's going on?
Well, in school systems, the moment we closed down schools, it was very apparent that school nutrition services would not stop, like for the whole country. Essentially, people who get free and reduced lunch, for the most part, rely on those meals. And a lot in my own district, you know, these kids, this is the only meals they get are the free and reduced lunch. So there was never a thought that we would stop still serving meals. Immediately in our area, mostly in Virginia and Maryland, we requested the waivers to fall under a different program. Instead of the National School Lunch Program, we asked, can we fall under the summer feeding program? It's a little more flexible and it's easier to manage on a large scale. DC, unfortunately, did not do that because of the proximity of people like producing that food. It became a health hazard for them. And I hope they change it. I haven't talked to anybody in a while, but I know that was something they were very concerned about. In my own district, we've actually become a lot busier, unfortunately. You think like with the COVID, so many people staying home, we're actually, instead of 18 schools, we're producing only out of 5 schools. So our sites are doing between like 6,000 meals a day, breakfast, lunch, and a snack. And we just transitioned to doing 1 hot meal, 1 cold meal. So and we extended to a Saturday feeding. So Monday, Wednesday, Friday, our school districts provide 2 meals 2 lunches, 2 breakfasts for every student enrolled. And we've blanketed now for anybody between the ages of 2 and 18 within the city. We have a lot of private schools who their children or their students are coming to us because they've completely shut down. And we're talking about expanding it further for adults who are having financial hardships.
Isaiah, what's the distribution piece? Are the students actually coming into the cafeteria to get that food, or how's that look?
Not at all. We have really cool setups with cones set up 6 feet apart outdoors in tents where people walk up or drive up. They grab their bag. They tell us how many kids they have. No questions asked. They grab their bag and they keep it moving. We have a waiver in now that students don't have to be present. Their parents can be present. So that helps reduce the amount of people that are outside as well.
Right, great. Yeah, I wondered about that. So, and Ben, how about your school district?
We have kind of a similar setup going. There's a really big central kitchen for the 37 schools. So some food goes out to different schools and some is prepared on site. So now I think most of it's being done in the central kitchen. And then distributed at sites around the city, you get food for a week, and you take it home, and some of it's ready to go and some has minimal preparation. But I know that they have had, it's really been, participation has been low compared to how many meals they usually serve. So there are families that aren't either able to get the food or don't know about it, or there's something. So that's a big challenge.
Yeah, it's interesting to see how different areas, different regions are dealing with that. I know here where I live, which is Appalachian, Ohio, rural, there was a special waiver along the lines of what you were saying, Isaiah, to align more closely with the summer food feeding sites. But the food isn't actually being prepared at the schools. Local restaurants, chefs in local restaurants are preparing the foods. And but they're keeping the school bus drivers employed they're going and they're continuing to drive the routes and distributing that food along the way. So, I mean, there are all these really interesting ways of addressing this that are very creative, but hopefully, it's the recognition that for many of these school children, at least, it is the most nutritious, if not the only meal that they're getting of the day. So, Gabe, how about you? How does that affect what you're doing?
Sure. I come at it, I think, from a different angle because I work with, entrepreneurs and established restaurants or restaurants that are getting going. For me, the crisis has really highlighted the gap between the haves and the have-nots, particularly as it pertains to restaurants. And what I mean by that is restaurants that are positioned to cater to foodies and to more affluent people had an easier time pivoting to GoFundMe pages for the staff and fancy meals to go kits because they already had the infrastructure of huge Instagram followings and online ordering and curbside pickup, whereas the restaurants that I help incubate are ones that are either just beginning or already operating at the margins, and oftentimes are catering towards less wealthy areas of Phoenix, where I live. And so that's been really challenging. And I talk to these people daily and they're scared. So I went almost overnight from dealing with helping people grow and establish themselves and how do they expand their business to how do we shift and get you to be able to survive this crisis. So I've had a crash course in SBA loans and all sorts of things that I never, had any idea about, but just trying to help these people safeguard their livelihood from an entrepreneurial lens. And the other thing that I would add is I had a Zoom call with Arizona Department of Education yesterday, and Lisa mentioned that in Ohio they're using restaurants to supply food to distribute through schools, and that's not happening in Arizona, although the Department of Education is exploring that because they've had capacity issues at the schools. They don't have, the workers are not willing to come in, and as Isaiah talked about, when he started in his position, it was a lot of heat and serve type things. And so the processed foods are not as readily available, but we have a wealth of farmers that have all this fresh food, but there's no one in those positions in the schools that have a knowledge of how to turn raw carrots into a cooked meal. And so the question is, do we rely on restaurants, or do we bring the existing staff that are willing and able to work up to speed? And I don't know what the answer to that is, but that's the question that Arizona Department of Education is asking.
And is that an either or question though? How can it be a both? Or can it
I don't think that it should be or has to be. The thought on this call yesterday was, how do we incorporate by either bringing chefs and restaurant workers into schools physically to work, and the the safeguards that would ordinarily happen if you were a background checks and so forth, right? Do we eliminate those? And I don't know. I mean, I don't know. And the other side of it is, if you're a chef or a restaurateur, how do you make any sort of living on $3.40, which is what the schools are paid for lunch here?
Right.
You know?
Yeah.
No easy answers.
Right. Yeah, that's very interesting. And I know they're doing some work here around this. I'm in Athens, Ohio, the Athens Army of Chefs. So it's something moving forward so that it will keep these folks working, you know, because they have gotten these guarantees now, these payroll guarantees, so that people can bring their employees back in to the kitchen, but they need work. And you know, it's certainly reduced just doing those carry out orders or pickup orders or whatever. So they're trying to hook them up with those farmers and get special pricing to source locally and have these folks, this Athens Army of Chefs, as it were, be the ones who are actually out there and producing food. And as you said, some of these restaurants, you know, there's this whole collaboration piece, that have the infrastructure for ordering online or whatever, are now putting a little button on there that says, you know, $6, you can order a meal that'll be, maybe it's beans and rice, but it's beans that were grown in Ohio and locally, you know, processed and milled. And so you're getting nutritious food, and people can, you know, order their meal and then put another $5 or $6 on there, and a meal will go out to somebody else. So there's all kinds of really interesting ways to look at it, but there are all kinds of difficulties. It's fraught with all of these regulations, and it was a great move, I think, that they were able to allow schools some flexibility, as you said, Isaiah, in terms of how they classified the food service piece. You know, so yeah, so let's talk about that. That's bringing up some of these issues about, you know, the things that are emerging. It's very clear that things aren't fair, that our food system had some problems to start with. And so some of those things are becoming important. And I wonder if anybody wanted to talk about that piece. How about Gabe?
Sorry, I was on mute. So as far as
I'm
the
just
impact,
like,
right?
Well, yeah, I mean, just the idea that, you know, this is impacting people in different ways, and it's bringing up very clearly that the inequities.
Sure. The thing that has been really striking to me is that the current state of things shows that we're capable of change, and big changes, and to be honest, rapid change. As an example, one of the farms that Local First Arizona works with has a CSA program, and prior to the COVID-19 crisis, they had 125-ish subscribers, and in a month, they've picked up 600. So that's huge, right? And that's huge income for farmers, but it also then stresses their ability to be able to deliver these things and package these things and all the stuff, the logistics that come with that, right? Refrigeration space and people in the fields picking the vegetables and so on, right? And so if you look at that one thing, 125 to 600, that's amazing, right? As somebody who is passionate about food systems change and getting people to shift towards a localized food system or diet, the question is, I think, how do we sustain these things as this crisis ebbs? Like at some point, this will change and we'll get different, right? It's hard to think that way now, as somebody who's been stuck in this house for 5 weeks, but it's going to change, right? And as it changes, what can we do to solidify those changes? So one of the things that my team is working on is documenting the positive changes and all these collaborations between chefs and restaurants and school systems and farmers and all this cool stuff that people have leapt to out of a sense of urgency and to meet a need, so that when this is done, on the back side of this, people don't go back to buying 10-pound tubes of ground beef from Walmart because it's cheap and it's convenient. So my hope is, like I said, to I don't know, solidify those changes in some measurable way.
Yeah, kind of from the educational angle, launching all of this distance digital learning as the entire way that we educate has really, I think, students who didn't have all the technology tools at home and all of that capability, which was so important even when we did have class, is now entirely important. And so they, they're not there. And it's, I think, highlighted an inequity in the system. So like Minneapolis and probably lots of districts are trying to get devices to people and to get wireless and make sure that everybody can engage in learning, which is really good. And you'd hope that that is something that then continues to be important in the system. And I wonder if that's sort of an analog for the food system, that we're finding, like if farmers have to dump their milk or, the supply chains aren't lining up, then there's something probably not quite as sustainable or resilient as it could be. So both education and the food system. To bring those together in the classroom eventually, that's hopefully what we're going to be doing.
One of the things that in our school district, we have this thing called principal coffee. And it's when they bring parents in to have coffee with the principal and they just talk about issues. And I've recently gotten on all their calendars. And one of the things I talk about is culinary education for the parents, particularly ones who aren't from the US. We have a lot of students who won't eat the food because they don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And one of the ways we address that is by educating the parents on like what's a spicy chicken sandwich. You'd be surprised how many times parents are like, I don't know what that is. It doesn't look like anything I've seen before. But once they know about it, kids are more likely to eat. And also that one of the things I try to tie in is under like connecting with farmers. A lot of parents are always like, man, I never thought about like getting a CSA, how cheap it is, and like actually going to meet the farmer. All our farms out here in the DC, Maryland, Virginia area have really cool parties where they ask you to bring their kids out and learn about the farm. And that's been a really good tool to help bridge that gap. And it sucks that I wasn't able to reach everybody before COVID-19 because all the farmers in this area are doing better than they ever have been because people are reaching out for something fresh. They feel like they can trust it more than something that they have no idea where it came from.
Yeah, that's a great point. And probably giving them a measure of security in terms of it's getting to be planting season too. And if you don't, if your regular markets are disrupted, what happens then? If they don't think that they're going to be able to supply restaurants or schools or whoever their regular customers are, that CSA piece can be a bit of a comfort, I would think. So you were talking about, you kind of made the segue, Ben, toward online culinary education. Everything's online. Are each of you engaged in doing that to some degree? If you are, I'd love to hear about that. And if you're not, maybe you can sort of throw out some resources or suggestions for places that that are doing it well, because it seems like there's a lot of that you see online. At least the heavyweight chefs are all out there with their little online classes and stuff. But what's really going on, and are you doing it?
I actually utilize the online classes they already have. Like Gordon Ramsay is very entertaining. So for culinary, so to keep social distancing and people from going out so much, our workers only have to work 3 days every other week. So they work Monday, Wednesday, Friday, they're off a week. But during the downtime, we assign them professional development. And 33% of that is culinary education, where I make videos on how to prepare new menu items for next year, or Gordon Ramsay, or a baking video. And then I give them simple questions that they have to answer afterwards. And that's one way we're helped doing this during this period for our staff.
That's great. That's awesome. You're like becoming a video star now, a
Something like
video chef. Who else? Is anybody else doing stuff online, actually teaching online?
Well, I mean, similarly, Isaiah, I have a lot of, there are a lot of places for students to go depending on what they're interested in for, videos, especially. I can't make a video as good as Gordon Ramsay's or, John Oliver or somebody. So there are lots of those. And then really, I think the key is to get them to then engage, with that and either doing some cooking or getting a conversation going about what they're learning. So it has been cool to see students, in discussion threads talking about what they're learning and much more, I think, students cooking with their families.
Mm.
So they've talked about how they're making a recipe with their auntie or with their mom or whoever, a family dish that they didn't know how to make. So it's affording that kind of time.
Yeah, that's neat.
I'm beginning to embark upon the education piece of my job online. We do, we call it Restaurant Startup Bootcamp, and it's basically the first step if you want to be one of the businesses that is incubated in our kitchen. It's a 6-week course, and we meet once a week. And our next cohort starts in June. And so I'm beginning to figure out how we're going to do that. There's no strict cooking piece of it, like where I'm saying this is how we butcher a chicken, like I did when I was in the culinary schools. More it's centered around taxation and permitting and restaurant math and things of those nature. So I bring in guest speakers each week. So when we do permitting, I bring the guy from the county health department that talks about permit. So I'm beginning to line those up, and I'll be doing something similar to what we're doing today. So this is a good insight into that.
Right. We're, as we said before we started, we're all spending time in these little boxes more and more. And then now you have each other as resources. So everybody, like Isaiah, everybody's like, they want to see your videos in the chat. It's coming up. So maybe we could, maybe we could share resources with others and certainly among chefs. Is there, like the thing with organizing is you don't ever want to reinvent the wheel. So the fact that each one of you are putting in so much time trying to come up with these ideas and these videos, do you know of any place to go to get help? Who's out there to kind of connect the educator chefs?
I rely heavily on our communications department. They were the actual ones who approached me about doing a chef video series on new from scratch items. They're like, oh, it'd be cool if the families know how to make that. Let's spend a few weeks videotaping them. And that's what we did. And now every week or every month or something like that, they push out a new video. It gets tied to our menu. So people are like, oh, this is what my kid ate and this is how we make it.
That's brilliant. That's great. Well, let's sort of wind up. We've got a few minutes before the top of the hour. And of course, we will continue to talk and go through question and answers. But I know that some people just have that hour allotted. So we want to try to get through. I would like to at least get through one more question, which is basically for each of you, what does it look like when we bridge the gap between the classroom and the cafeteria? How do you frame that?
Well, I mean, for me, it's quite literally, I mean, this is, a bigger question. But for me, it's quite literally connecting the school cafeteria to the culinary education and getting kids to to see themselves in the food that they're eating at school, and to make, like Isaiah, you were saying, make that an active learning space, and like a reflection of who they are. And that they have agency in. So how we get there, man, when the system is so different, it really does happen though in sort of, if not subversive, kind of working through less formal avenues and just real relationships and small inroads, and then yeah, it starts to grow. Isaiah, I wonder what you think.
So that's my big mantra in the school district. Two ways we're working on it. Every month we do something called Around the World Wednesday, where we pick a country and I take one of their dishes and I convert it to a plant-based version and I sample it at 5 schools. And then the following week on the Wednesday, the cafeteria is responsible for making it for themselves. And I pick countries strategically. My February is like African Culture Month or Black History Month. So I chose Dorowat, an Ethiopian dish. Um, and we have a lot of Ethiopia. Alexandria City has the highest concentrations of Ethiopia than any other city in the world, or not the world, but this country. Um, so that was one way. And when the kids for the whole month, I work with the administration to study on the school or the country itself. So when the dish comes around, that just puts the nail in the coffin. Like, oh, we've been learning about Ethiopia all month, and then boom, we got to try some Dorowat. Um, that's one way I'm working with it. And another way is I'm starting a pilot program next year where I'm working with a kindergarten class, a second grade class, and fifth grade class, where we're going to try the Japanese model of lunches, where lunch is a class instead of a totally different thing, where the food will be brought to the class, the kids will go over hygiene, sanitation, they'll serve each other, to talk about the food, where it actually came from, it'll be made from scratch, and the teacher eats with them. And that I'm really excited that we're going to kick that off in October. And that's one of the ways I'm trying to work with our administration to bridge the gap. And the cool part about that is when it becomes a class, the dollars don't necessarily have to come from nutrition. So as one way to stay financially viable as a program.
Cool.
Yeah, that's great. And you know, Gabe, I was just thinking quickly, I know we're getting close to the top of the hour, but I was thinking back because I knew a little bit of something about your capstone. And you know, the way you built in sort of a participatory element with the folks that you worked with in terms of you know, bridging that gap between cafeteria and classroom. You were talking to them about the things that they wanted to learn, and devising sort of a curriculum around that.
Yeah, and this was one of I mentioned, you know, a learning curve when I started my position. One of the things that I don't know what it was, maybe just ego. I thought that I would just kind of waltz in like, oh, well, this is what everybody wants to learn. And I'd throw out all these great recipes and everybody would think I was great. And it really took me the better part of a year to build trust within the community and figure out what they needed from me, so that it wasn't about what I thought they needed. And so just listening to Ben and Isaiah is just, to me, is super inspiring. But really to come at it with some humility and just say, you know, how can I be of service to this community? And I think that can be applied to any number of things.
Well, that's great. And we want to welcome Robin back in with some Q&A, but I do want to say thank you to those folks who were coming in on the call today. In case you have to leave, we appreciate that you spent the last hour with us. It was a terrific discussion. Hope that you'll check back in with us next week. But at this point, we'll kind of scooch on over to a question and answer. I kept seeing out of the corner of my eye that chat was very busy, so it looks like there were some questions. No, Robin?
Yes. So, and I think I'll start. It's hard to know what order to put these in, but I think I'm going to start with this one. So, given the current situation, how do you all see the future of hands-on culinary education, you know, from all of your different perspectives?
I can start.
Okay, Gabe, and then Isaiah.
Sure. Beat you to it, man. So what I would say, I mean, with the entrepreneurs that I work with, I think that the education piece of it is going to be something that is, as we look at, so I think we're in triage now, right? And then as we look at kind of rebuilding and then ultimately, hopefully, resiliency, As we get to the rebuilding portion of it, I think entrepreneurial endeavors will be one of the engines by which we build back a food system. And hopefully, as I mentioned, it's the food system that we want as opposed to the food system that we have currently.
Excellent point. Isaiah?
I will definitely follow with resiliency. I think we don't think of teaching resiliency as like a thing when it comes to culinary instruction for some reason. But I think considering what we've seen and what we've gone through, resiliency is probably one of those hidden curriculum ideas now that now we got to teach people how to cook, but how do we teach them how to cook when the lights go out or when you can't get carrots for your mirepoix? You know, like we got to find ways to get our future chefs and culinarians to be more adaptable to crazy situations.
Yeah, I would agree. And especially with students who will have come through this, it will just, I think it will add to the way that they approach the food system, that they'll have ideas that we don't even know about yet, and they'll be thinking about local ingredients, alternative ingredients. And so to really just try and foster that in the curriculum, build that in. What can it look like?
Yeah, thank you. So some of the questions were specifically about it seems they're more focused on the school meal programs. And so one of the questions is concerning, is there a noticeable distinction amongst those who are picking up the school meals and who is unable to pick up the school meals? And Olivia specifically was curious if there was a relationship to income.
At this point, for most school districts in the U.S., there isn't one. Now that everybody's filed for that, can we go to a lunch serving program? Depending on the ratio of your free reduced in your district, most districts are free when it comes to summer feeding programs.
And in Minneapolis, yeah, there's a site within, strategically throughout the city so that no one has to go a certain amount. They don't have to move too far to pick up the food, but it is more difficult than when students went to school and got the food. So I know that there are people who, for those reasons, we don't know exactly why, because they're not picking it up. But I'm not sure exactly how that breaks down. And they're looking at different ways to use the school buses as well, like with what Lisa was saying, so that they've been distributing devices to different families, but I think they're going to start delivering food as well.
Interesting. Yeah, like the buses in Vermont, one of the, it was actually Christine, I think Christine Gall in Vermont was mentioning how they've mobilized their school buses there to help with the distribution and also to destigmatize the supplemental nutrition, the supplemental meals. This question specifically mentions you, Ben, but I think I'm going to just go ahead and throw it out there also to you, Isaiah. And of course, Gabe, you're welcome to chime in. But, the question specifically was that Ben mentioned that in his region, food was being distributed weekly. How does the team ensure that it's nutritious? So, for example, many fruits and veg can be perishable.
That is a great question. Probably, Isaiah, you'll have more insight into how it's done from the culinary, the district culinary services standpoint. But I know that they are meeting nutritional requirements with all the meals. That's got to be done. And so, yeah, in our district, let's see, they have a central kitchen, which is the size of a school, where they make things in really large amounts, but they're still making it fresh. So they're making like a salad dressing from scratch, but they're making it, you know, in a tub the size of a room almost. And not quite that big. And so then, but then it is packaged and then it goes out. So in some ways it's processed, in some ways it's fresh. But they're also similar to you, Isaiah, they're through Facebook in different ways, pushing out videos on how to prepare the food. Like, you know, you're getting this, here's how you can cook it in a microwave or on the stovetop or in the oven.
Yeah, Minneapolis says their culinary trainer, Becca, I watch all her videos. She's the one who gave me the first idea to start doing that for bulk.
Oh, nice.
In my district, we actually haven't gone to bulk yet because I want to get rid of our freezer inventory before I start bringing in different product for bulk items. So basically what we're feeding now is the leftover stuff. The decision for us to close was very random and very quickly. So I'm getting rid of old inventory before I bring in new stuff. As far as doing bulk and nutritional standards, like Ben said, in order for a departments to get reimbursed for meals, they have to meet nutritional guidelines, and that's, you know, 51% whole grain when there's a grain product involved, which isn't too hard. Sodium and sugar all have to match a certain level. A certain amount of fruits have to go out. It's really not that difficult.
Mm-hmm. Maybe I would add for you. Yeah. And for all the qualified professionals, for those of us who are not grounded in the same training that you all have had, that sounds overwhelming. So with appreciation. There's a question: has anyone had success collaborating with non-governmental organizations or politicians in requiring or subsidizing local food for farm to cafeteria? Go for it, Gabe.
Yeah. It's not necessarily farm to cafeteria, but someone, and maybe Robin at the top, or maybe even on the pre-call that we were all on, we were talking about farmers markets being declared as essential services. And one of the advocacy pieces that Local First did when Governor Doug Ducey was trying to figure out what to close and what to keep open is we wrote a piece in support of keeping farmers markets as essential services. And we hope that that directly led to that being put on the list of acceptable things, realizing that farmers markets are as much a source of foods as you know, any supermarket chain. So that's one thing that we've done.
Mm-hmm.
One thing I know, I work with at schools, our farm to school initiatives, and it's not anything different that I haven't done before. Basically reach out to a farmer and say, hey, I want to buy from you. How much is your product? And we make things work for both of us.
Mm-hmm.
A really cool thing in our school district is we do something called Harvest of the Month, where a lot of school districts do it, but I'm changing it to like Farm of the Month, where I highlight a product still, but I put the farm up front. So, you know, not only do we give them a guaranteed business throughout the year, they get more publicity for, hopefully our stakeholders will invest in them as well, outside of the school.
Cool.
Yeah, and that's you know, Amy Trubeck's research, you know, coming out of Vermont about showing, you know, that the more information that you have about the farm and the farmer, then the more likely folks are to want and accept and choose, you know, that production. So that's interesting. Ben, did you have a comment?
I guess, well, one thing we've had luck with is working with the neighborhood associations. And so we've done empty bowls events and community meals through the schools with culinary arts and the cafeteria kitchens and the community. And so, yeah, there are a lot of organizations out there that are like already embedded in the community.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in real quickly, just because that's something that has been happening here for a while, and it is that model of working with nonprofit organizations. So school districts are working with a nonprofit organization that helps facilitate a regional produce auction. and food from that produce auction is then purchased by schools, and in some cases even processed by local culinary arts program, whose students need those hours chopping vegetables, and the food service workers in the schools don't necessarily have the time or the skills to do that. So it's just this complete loop, but that's one way they're getting locally grown food into the school cafeterias. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Oh, I'm sorry, Isaiah, please go ahead. Oh, are you muted?
All right, I'm not. Okay. One thing is weird. I really don't like the term local anymore. I don't know if the MSFS program ruined me on it or not, because everyone has such a different definition of it. I'm really specific now. Like people are like, oh, we have local produce. I'm like, no, it's from West Virginia. And they're like, well, that's local. It's like, well, to you, but to the Virginia growers between here and there, they would feel differently. So I make it a point when people are like, oh, are you doing local, to like pinpoint like where's it going? Where are the dollars being spent?
Maybe that's that bioregional framing we were talking about earlier.
Yeah, there was, and thank you, Isaiah, because you posed that question in the chat, and it did spur some discussion in there in the chat about what are those boundaries. And as we know, it's a controversial topic. And then there's local in terms of distance, but then also local in terms of relationships. And so really that seems that in some ways that's what you were speaking to earlier with your designation of the individual farms. I do have another question here. This is more about the distribution of meals, but what happens if the food is not picked up by the families? So if you prepare more meals than families were able to pick up, are there other outlets that you distribute the unused lunches to, or is it you're able to pinpoint your portions?
Oh, we're really good at it. Like I don't even, it hasn't even come up that we might have food that gone bad. If one site's doing better than the other one, we redistribute, and if we make a meal on Monday, we have extra, it goes away on Wednesday. It's not even an issue.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. Thank you. And I do have another question that was directed directly to Isaiah, but I encourage others to chime in. So the question is, I think we're all facing this as we're going through the inventory in our kitchens also, with challenges procuring things. But as you're going through the inventory, are you having any difficulty providing diversified menu items? And so this is coming from Christine Gall. She says, after 5 weeks of serving from remote meal sites and focusing on utilizing our existing inventory and relatively shelf-stable items, our food service department has had some families express frustration with repetitious meals.
Well, personally, we haven't. Due to this COVID, I've had a lot of flexibility in being creative. So we had meatballs one day. I was like, oh, teriyaki meatballs this week. Next week, I was like, oh, I have some berbere spice. I'm doing Ethiopian spice meatballs the next week. There hasn't been 1 week where things have been the same, because I've had the leeway to just do what I want as long as it meets the guidelines.
I was going to echo, I think my daughter also has those comments about repetitious meals. All right, back to the questions. There was a question about, how does food safety fit in with the distributions? So I think I missed the context of when the question was specifically asked, but so I promised to ask the questions that were posted. So how does food safety play into the distributions?
Well, I don't think food safety has changed at all for like the last 60 years. Like you wash your hands, you don't cough on the food, you make sure your time, temperature, danger zone is good. And I don't foresee that changing unless we run across a pathogen that really influences, how we handle food.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I think that's a theme that's been coming up in our webinars since our very first one. And so it's just a reinforcement, you know, as we have our chefs and those engaged in culinary education, it is an acknowledgement of the level of professionalism of the workforce in food preparation. So, you know, of course, there aren't any new issues with food safety because, you know, that is the core, along with taste. Well, folks, I would like to give you all the opportunity for final comments. We've come to the end of our questions, so don't feel like you have to, but if there's anything additional that you'd like to say, I'd also invite Lisa to come back. Show your face, Lisa. So there you go, and watch your mute button. So but anyway, I wanted to thank you all for coming and give you all an opportunity for some parting comments, and just a reminder to the folks who have chimed in, who've joined us today, that you're welcome to join us again next week, where we'll be talking about the food system in Alaska, as we all encounter and pivot and adjust in the face of COVID. So any final comments?
I do. I'm really curious to hear from Ben about having food systems as a department and a high school. Like, that sounds amazing. I would love to hear like what that actually means.
Thanks. Maybe, yeah, my final comments can be just the way a school is its own little community, and it has its own community food system. And to really, in the future, I mean, we've been trying to do this from the beginning, but to think about how that entire community food system can be a learning opportunity for the students, and a chance for them to reimagine what a larger food system is going to be that, like, you know, way to think about new things or practice new things and interact with the, you know, the cafeteria and all of it. And so I really appreciate being a part of this conversation, which has to do with, you know, whether it's like getting out into the workforce and like incubating a business, you know, that's a big part of what so many students talk about wanting to do when they leave. And like the food that they're eating right now in the cafeterias. And so it feels really important. And though we're all kind of stuck inside, it also feels like a time when it's almost like the fermentation part, you know, like we're not, you can't see us working, but we're working, and we're going to come out like differently.
I love that. That's fabulous. And I just wanted to say thanks to each and every one of you. It was great to see you all again, and thanks for the conversation.
No, thank you.
Yeah.
All right, well, back to the kitchens, back to our back to the important work that you all do. Thank you very much for taking a break from that in order to join us today and to share your experiences and your knowledge with those who've joined us today. So take care. Thank you so much. And thank you, Lisa, for your wonderful facilitation job.
Thanks for having me.
Our
Thank you.
pleasure.